Hello, everyone. My name is Anmol Singh.
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria and we both are the security architects, and today we are going to talk about the managing access entitlement and their lifecycle in a multi-cloud environment.
As organizations continue to explore and onboard a multi-cloud strategy, poor management of access entitlements and their life cycle introduces several new and unknown risks during the cloud migrations, leading to a number of security and compliance issues that continue to accumulate over time. In the session today, we are going to talk about how you should be effectively managing access entitlements and their life cycle in a multi-cloud setup. So this is how our agenda is going to look like for the session. We are going to talk about some of the stats from the industry that are going to be validating the overall uptake of a multi-cloud environment for organizations. We'll talk about some of the key challenges that most organizations and security leaders are facing when it comes to managing access entitlements in a multi-cloud environment. Also, we'll talk about how some of these hybrid and multi-cloud environments have adopted for managing access entitlements, and what's the more popular adoption patterns that have emerged over a period of time. From there, we'll talk about some of the best practices and recommendations, basically an approach for managing entitlements in a multi-cloud environment.
And from there, we will deep dive into the technical part, like let's do some demo and see how we can manage the entitlements from the practical perspective. And after that, we will wrap the session by the takeaways and the action plan, which you can take with you after our session.
Thank you, Victoria. So let's straight away dive into the numbers. This is how we have witnessed the multi-cloud sprawl growing in the industry. If you look at some of the surveys from the industry, you'll see that on an average, about 80 to 85% of organizations have an active multi-cloud strategy as of today, and somewhere about 50 to 55% of organizations are actually executing on a multi-cloud setup. Even if you look at the two surveys on the left-hand side, they are from a single source about a year apart, and they talk about an increase of somewhere 3% in the uptake of multi-cloud strategy for their enterprise cloud setup. What are the key challenges in terms of managing the cloud access entitlements in the cloud? What we see is there is a cloud adoption patterns, both the pace and objectives are not consistent with the critical access management requirements in the cloud. And therefore, they are ignorant, or I would say devoid, of cloud access governance objectives on a broader scale. Basically, the entitlements lifecycle management is more frequently absent from cloud migration strategies, leading to continued access authorization and governance issues. Moreover, a lack of visibility of identity lifecycle management across the cloud workloads in the early adoption processes leads to some inconsistencies in the management of access entitlements at a later stage. We also see some challenges around common cloud misconfiguration evolving from the disparate cloud security models, security features, and skills, as well as the quest of organizations to implement a cross-cloud least privilege model at scale. There is also an emergence of multitude of entitlement types, given the capabilities of different CSPs or cloud service providers of native access entitlement capabilities, as well as there are significant differences in the overall granularity of cloud native entitlements that these CSPs are supporting. We also see some of the challenges around enterprises having internal or native entitlement management capabilities. For example, they might be using tools like IGA, Identity Governance Administration, or even EAMs, externalized authorization management tools that are mostly built around managing coarse-grained entitlements focused on certain applications. And therefore, they fail to address the overall entitlement management requirements of a hybrid cloud environment. Plus, they can't be really remodeled for the purpose. And finally, we also see that there is very poorly managed or entirely absent cloud access governance, resulting from a poor planning of managing access entitlements early in the process of cloud migration strategies. So how is the state of entitlement management in the cloud evolving? Before we dive into that, I'd like to quickly take you through some of the common definitions of the terminology that we are going to frequently use throughout this session. Well, access entitlements are simply the individual access rights or permissions which determine access to an asset. The roles, which are more commonly referred to as a logical grouping of these access entitlements. Administrative entitlements are basically the assignment of attributes and permissions that enable your users to perform given tasks. And most of the time, these are the entitlements which are given to a user at the time of provisioning. We've also got runtime entitlements, which are based on specific contexts, depending on the activity of the user, what the user is trying to attempt when to access an asset or a service. And finally, cloud service providers, as we all are aware of, these are the companies or organizations offering cloud-based assets, services, resources for your organizations. So most commonly, when you try to build upon a multi-cloud strategy or even a cloud migration strategy, you'd see that there are different types of users who are trying to use your cloud infrastructure and services. And they would result into specific cloud roles. Those roles could be auditors, testers, operators, developers, cloud administrators, or even the resource owners. At the same time, you have got the cloud service providers offering you different cloud service model. For example, there's a management plane, which comprises of different resource management entitlements. There is also going to be infrastructure security layer, which comprises of infrastructure entitlements as well as network management entitlements. There is a virtualization layer, which comprises of compute entitlements that need to be provided to some specific users as well. And also application security and database security layers, which have got specific application access and information entitlements within. Now, for all of these cloud roles, as you would see, there's a need for you to provide access to these different layers within the cloud service provider. For example, the developers may need restricted access to database and application security layers, while they have a need to have full access on the virtualization components, as well as the resource owners who may need to have restricted access or only read-only access to application security versus they need full access on your resource management plane or resource management entitlements. So how are you going to provide the access management entitlements and manage the overall lifecycle of these entitlements throughout in the cloud adoption framework? All these roles, for example, as you see, they would be fed into your entitlement lifecycle journey. And those could be at different stages of creation and updation of the roles. For example, application registrations, or those could be identified as enterprise roles or even application roles. Most organizations have some sort of a tool or a framework to manage these roles, to create these roles, to maintain these roles, upgrade these roles, and deploy them, whether it's on-prem or in a hybrid environment. And these tools basically comprise of a policy engine, which is eventually looking to connect with your CSPs via different sort of mechanisms. There are different mechanisms that these different cloud service providers are supporting as of today. For example, some cloud service providers might provide you with the provision of gateway-based application proxies that sort of use a native policy agent on the cloud service provider end for you to push these access entitlements into the cloud for the applications to consume. Some CSPs may have a built-in policy enforcement point, and you need to integrate your policy engine via some sort of a framework that would push these authorization claims for these access permissions to be enforced in the cloud service provider for the users to access these resources or applications on demand. There is also some mechanisms which we have depicted as broken policy management, because they require manual intervention for you to push these roles and push these access entitlements in form of some flat files or other formats for the applications in a particular CSPs. We have also seen some patterns where enterprises are using private cloud, and they have come up with an idea of maintaining an entitlement databases, which are integrated with your on-prem entitlement manager, and they fetch in the required access entitlements and information for the applications and resources to be provisioned with. Now, these were some of the common cloud adoption patterns for managing access entitlements. At the same time, in this section, we are going to focus on how you should be looking at managing the entitlements in the cloud. So to begin with, you need to understand and start to build on common evaluation criteria. We like to sort of divide that into the more specific parts. How are you going to define your cloud administrative entitlements? And this is going to be more dependent on what kind of role model that is existing as of today in your enterprise. At the same time, what is the maturity of an access policy management, as well as what is the maturity of your group management capabilities? For example, do you need to create specific groups when it comes to start managing access entitlements in a particular resource or application? Or can your existing groups can be tweaked with the specific access group permissions for managing these access entitlement for these applications? Also, you need to look into what is the requirement and also support which is available for managing some segregation of duty conflicts that might arise when these specific access permissions are to be assigned or grouped within specific roles for the users. All of these can be dependent on the requirements or capabilities around user provisioning, access cataloging, access request workflows, access approvals, segregation of duty checks, what kind of automation that you have or you're planning to achieve over a period of time for managing your cloud administrative entitlements, as well as what is the role lifecycle management function in your organization. Similarly, we have also got the cloud runtime entitlements. These are the entitlements that need to determine the type of access which will be given to a user based on the context that the user is bringing at the time of the activity. And these will depend on the overall granularity of the resource and targets which the user is trying to access. For example, what is the kind of database, VM, or specific type of files that the user might be trying to access? There are the support for subject attributes. What is the user type, whether it's employee, a remote worker, whether it's a guest user, or it's a consumer. What is the locale, what is the nationality of the user, and all those different attributes which might be directly relatable to this particular subject. Support for resource attributes. What is the type of resource the user is trying to access? Support for contextual attributes, as I mentioned, those could be the geolocation, time of day, etc. And finally, the support for some of the obligatory requirements for the access. Things like if a privileged user is trying to access a specific asset which is privileged in nature, again, you might want to ramp up the overall logging requirement for the user. So basically, the various attributes that you are gonna be evaluating for determining these criteria are the class and application of resources, class of application or resources, an operation within application that might also be required to determine the type of access, what is the authenticator type, geolocation, time of day, device identity, device health, as well as specific a logging requirement. This is what an entitlement lifecycle in the cloud should look like. So to start with, these are different phases of how you're going to manage the entitlements, right from the stage of discovering those entitlements. So the first stage, as we talk about, is the analysis, where we are looking to sort of discover the overall permissions that might be required to be built as part of your overall role design process. Generally, role mining is a very good framework or a vehicle for you to start building upon these roles. Also, what is important for you to understand is what is the uniqueness level of these permissions as when you're trying to combine or do a logical grouping of these entitlements into a role. What is the type of these permissions, whether they're application specific, system specific, and also what is the scope of these particular permissions that you have discovered. Similarly, what is the how are you going to start to look into the role designing process, where you would have to start building upon the logical grouping of these entitlements by the business functions, risk, and your compliance requirements. This is where you'll need to have the business involved in and have an active collaboration with business to understand what is going to be the most logical grouping of these entitlements that is most relevant to the business functions. Also, you might want to understand what are different kind of attributes that should also be built in your role design. A common recommendation at this stage is that you might want to keep your role design pretty flexible. So you might want to also bring in some of the dynamic attributes or even contextual attributes at the time of building these roles. As well as you might also want to consider what is the segregation of duty risk analysis requirements. At this stage, you might also only want to consider what specific permissions might be creating segregation of duty conflicts when they're combined together in a specific role, and how these roles should be assigned to different users for different applications. Now we move into the role deployment phase, which is more of a shared responsibility between the customer and the CSPs. This is exactly where you start to think about how you're going to provision these roles for your CSPs, of course, for the users to access these applications and resources. Most CSPs would offer you some sort of a role simulation capability. This could be in form of role simulators or some sort of a what-if analysis exercises where you can understand what is going to be the impact when these roles are provisioned for the users. At this stage, you also might want to consider what is going to be your deployment methodology. How are you going to make sure that these roles are going to be deployed across the different CSPs as well as different environments that are going to be provisioned in these CSPs. As I mentioned, it's important for you to also bring in the DevOps perspective here to make sure that there is most efficient way for you to move these role deployment across your environments. And finally, what kind of mechanism are you going to use in terms of the deployment scripts, whether those are PowerShell scripts, Terraform scripts, or let's say Python scripts. There's also the maintenance capabilities for your roles, which are most commonly offered by the CSPs. And they provide you capabilities with updating these roles on a regular basis, also optimizing these roles, making sure that the roles are consolidated if there is a need to be. Some of the CSPs also offer pretty decent continuous segregation of duty checks. This is also an important feature because when there are specific role updates or some changes to the roles, you're not going to go back into the role design process to make sure that the changes which are being done to the roles are compliant to the segregation of duty analysis or your segregation of duty requirements. So make sure that your CSPs also offer some features around a continuous segregation of duty checks. And finally, also, what is the automated remediation mechanisms that these CSPs are offering when there is a specific conflict or a permission issue with some of the roles or some updates which are being done to these access permissions within the roles. And finally, we talk about the role governance, which provides you the capabilities for role approval workflows, role certifications, which are again very important for you to make sure that you have a mature cloud access governance, as well as role model insights to understand how is the role model progressing within the organization, what kind of roles are creating particular bottlenecks, what kind of roles are more effective in the overall operational process. It can also be very helpful for you to start working on a sort of a role redesign process by bringing in some of the information around the roles that need to be deprecated, the roles which are not used or orphaned for a period of time. As well as they provide you with some good information around overall role analytics, as well as auditing and reporting capabilities to bring in the required efficiency into your overall role management and operational process. So this is how you might want to approach the entire role design, analysis, deployment, maintenance, and governance processes. So you might want to start with the basic entitlements analysis, and that could probably take somewhere between 3 to 4 months, where you are going to be more responsible for making sure that you are able to discover and mine most of your cloud access permissions, have an understanding of those permissions, what kind of permissions those are, and what resources and applications that they relate to, as well as you might want to also start mapping these entitlements to the cloud evaluation criteria that we discussed, whether they are part of your cloud administrative entitlements or whether they are part of your cloud runtime entitlements. And again, what are the capabilities that these CSPs are going to provide you for both of these categories? From there on, you would like to dive into the role designing process from, let's say, third month onwards, where you are going to look into how you're going to group some of these roles into the business relevant functions, as well as you might also want to start building on a role design with the right mix of the various contextual attributes, dynamic rules, as we discussed, along with the attributes and the roles, which are going to be part of your overall role design process. From there on, we are going to look into, from fifth month onward, you're going to look into the cloud entitlement support. And this is exactly where you're going to collaborate more closely with the CSPs to start building upon or carrying out some of the role simulation exercises as to what is the impact of these roles are going to be when these roles are provisioned into infrastructure, how the role management workflows are going to play out, as well as what is the kind of methodology that you are going to use for your overall role deployment process. From there on, I would say month 8 onwards, you are going to look into the cross-cloud deployment method. So start provisioning the roles. Look into how you're gonna span out the segregation of duty across the various cloud providers, as well as determine or decide on what kind of deployment scripts that you're going to use for the different CSPs. And finally, for cloud access governance, the best idea is for you to start with role certifications at a minimum, and you could probably start from month 10 onwards to start getting some of the really critical insights into if the users who need access have the right set of access on the right set of resources. And from there on, you might want to build upon the things like overall access governance capabilities, things like role analytics, as well as reporting and dashboarding capabilities. Well, with that, we'd like to get into the demo, and over to you, Victoria, for the demo on Azure Active Directory IND governance.
Yeah, thanks, Anmol. So like Anmol covered, there are a lot of the different cloud service providers who are providing a lot of the different tools in terms of the identity governance. Let me focus on one of them. And in this particular case, I want to look on the Azure and with the identity provider, which is Azure Active Directory. So I'm in the management portal, and I'm going to cover the part which Anmol mentioned, like in terms of the identity governance. Once you have set up all the flow and all understanding like what type of the accesses and who needs to manage them, it's time to implement them through the identity governance. And in my particular example, I will focus on the administrative entitlements. So I do have my identity provider, which comes in with the build option of the identity governance, and which has a different services which are going to cover the entitlement management lifecycle. On the left hand, we can see that it all starts with the access packages. This is a place where we create and manage the access packages, which contains the definition of for whom that access package is targeted, what type of the access it provides, and what type of the life cycle. Like it could be in the permanent, or it could be time-wise. And then as well, like when you start to work a lot of the access packages, you may end up having plenty of them. And there's a sense to make the structure of them. So there are the catalogs, which you may think as a logical growth box, but as well, the catalogs itself, they do allow you to define what type of the resources are allowed to be exposed in this particular catalog. So once you start to create the access package inside of this catalog, you are limited with some specific resources. And as well, you can oversee the access packages and who manages these access packages, who is a catalog owner, which is really useful. Like in this case, I have like the marketing catalog, and that means that I can just give the rights to the marketing department, and they oversee the sum of the resources where they are responsible for, and they can create the catalog, the access packages according to their needs. And as well, in today's world, we don't live in the silo. We work a lot with the partners, and that means we invite our partner identities or the users to collaborate. And you don't want to end up having the identity governance, which is pretty open and any organization could be invited. So there's a way how to configure and limit towards the connected organizations. Like in my particular case, I do have the Gmail, like, or the Google or the Microsoft, and some of them is like either configured by myself as an admin of the identity governance, or the system just tracks and see there was invited some of the users. So from that particular organization, maybe it's time to edit as in the connected organizations. And of course, over the time, when you have plenty of the people who are using your access packages and are having the some assignments, you want maybe to catch up and see what type of the access are granted to that particular person. And this is where it comes like Anmol mentioned, the reporting part. So you could always select and see that this user is actively involved in the different type of the access packages. And let's deep dive inside of the access packages. So when we create or establish the new access package, we should define the several fields, like, of course, what is the access package for? And let me take the example. The marketing department is doing the marketing campaign for the next few months, and they need to collaborate as well with the external partners. So in this case, we want to create the access package which targets that specific marketing campaign with the time limited. So we define the name, description, and as well we place under the marketing catalog. And this is, as a next step, what we do, we define the resource roles, like what type of the groups we should give, like for example, I would like to give the access to the marketing resources, and enroll all the people who are coming to that campaign, enroll to the marketing team as members, and or provide some specific application access, like for the marketing campaign, with the role like as being the default access, or it depends what type of the roles that application gives to you. Once we have settled all the resources, we of course need to define what type of the request we would like to build upon, like what type of the policies. And this could be the different. For the internal users, like for the company users, you may have like the relaxed way of granting. So the person just sees that access package, applies for that access package, and gets inside and gets all of these resources. Of course, maybe if that person is specifically into the marketing in the marketing team. So you can limit the scope who actually can apply. But other than that, you don't want to have any approval processes or something. In case of the users who are coming, or the guests, your partners, maybe you still want to enforce the approval process with the business justification and with the specific approver person, who could be the manager of the project or some specific person or more persons. And once you have configured these policies, another thing is if you are requiring the approvals, you may end up like saying that for the auditing purposes, I would love to have the additional questions. So you can define the additional questions which will be asked to these external people who are going through the approval process. And what is most important, you need to focus as well on the life cycle. So like in my case, I have the marketing campaign, and it will work, for example, till the 6th of June, and maybe as well. You know how it happens when a lot of the projects, they tend maybe to go longer when it was planned initially, and you want to leave the space to extend the access for the users, so they could request again and say like, yes, indeed, we need to extend our access. So once you have defined all of these things, you end up having the access package pre-created for you with all the details and with the two policies, like I mentioned. Let me switch here to the two policies, which could be one different policy for the internal, like we discussed, without any approvals, and for the externals. And once that access package starts to be used by the people, you will see the all active assignments and as well like the logs of all of the requests. And you may find out that there's some external person who is pending for the approval. So me as a responsible for the maintaining this access package, I can just go to the My Access Microsoft.com, where I see all the access packages as an internal to which I can apply. Like in this case, this was a marketing campaign June, but as well, since I'm the responsible for the approval, I see under the approvals that someone is requesting the access from the external. And I can see as well all the details, like what was a business justification and what are the additional information what I have requested. And if I find that this is satisfying me, I can recheck the rights to the applications are the right ones. I can provide the reasoning that, yeah, it seems good. We need to give the access to that person and approve the process. And of course, then over the time when you work a lot with all of these packages, what comes into the view is all the access reviews. So you want to see, or since we have enforced the access reviews, we want to see the results and see how it works out. Because we obviously want to get rid of the people who already have finished their project, and they shouldn't be active in your identity provider and shouldn't have the accesses. The good thing is that in this case, you can rely on the system or on the identity governance who does the sum of the analysis for you. And in the results, if the person have messed up the reviewing, like the responsible person was not reviewing when the access review time came, you always can see the recommended action by the system. And if the system sees that the user is not using that resource, it proposes maybe it's time to remove the access. And in the settings, you can immediately put that to be done automatically. So it's a lot of the capabilities from the technical side, but like Anmol described, it is the most important part is to define all that process, do the mining and define the process of what type of the access packages, what type of the entitlement management you would like to see in your organization. That was demo from my side. Back to you, Anmol.
Right. Thank you, Victoria. And that was a great demonstration of what kind of capabilities you would need from a CSP to sort of start working on your overall role deployment, role maintenance, and towards better access governance capabilities. And in this case, it was focused on Azure Active Directory identity governance. So we'd like to talk some of the key takeaways and action plan from towards the end of this session. Some of the key takeaways that we'd like to focus on at this stage are you need to sort of bring the entitlement management and role authorization discussions early in the CSP selection and planning so that there is sufficient visibility into what kind of entitlements you'd like to manage for your users, for the applications and resources that they need to have access to, and how you're gonna define and create the most effective roles for authorizing or making these authorization decisions. You also need to understand and define clearly the access management requirements for each of the IT and business functions to come up with a entitlement matrix. I think that is something that we sort of showcased earlier in the session. Also, while you're working on cloud entitlement journey, you might want to start mapping the access entitlements against each of the CSP's native authorization management capabilities, for the reason that they might differ a lot, not only in the technical abilities, but also, as I mentioned, in the terminology that are being used across the different CSPs. Also, you should start working on building a role model and a deployment strategy to achieve the maximum amount of consistency for your multi-cloud strategy. The best consistency that you can achieve would be more suitable for consolidated and sort of a more effective cloud access governance at a later stage. And finally, if you have a need, you should also look into evaluating, acquiring, and implementing the right or appropriate technology or tool set for your cross-cloud entitlements management. An action plan that you might want to take away also is immediately after this session, you should look into reviewing the access entitlements and the concepts that we have discussed in this session. In the next coming 2 to 3 months time frame, you should look into reviewing your business and operational requirements for managing these entitlements, evaluating the various CSPs identity and access management capabilities that will be required for supporting your entitlement management requirements or needs. Work on defining an entitlement lifecycle management process to support your overall multi-cloud strategy, and also start to prepare a business case for cross-cloud entitlement management, which is going to help you gather the required sponsorship or overall support from business owners and application owners in the process. Towards the last 3 to 4 months in a 1-year time frame, you might also want to start creating an access control model that really suits your overall cloud access governance strategy. So as I said, you might have a proper understanding and visibility of your access governance strategy, which sort is overarching your overall multi-cloud or cross-cloud uptake. You should also look into building a framework or sponsorship for selecting and investing in an appropriate tool, technology, or processes that is going to address your overall multi-cloud entitlement requirement management requirements. And finally, start building on and executing on the plan that is going to continuously refine, optimize, extend your overall entitlement management with the support of additional CSPs, ID governance capabilities. Well, with that, we'd like to wrap up our session, and thank you for listening in.
Thank you, and I hope you have enjoyed our session.